Good evening, everyone. Am I audible? Please respond if I'm audible. Yes. Am I audible? Okay. Thank you so much. So, welcome to the analysis of the interim budget 24-25. Before starting with the analysis of the interim budget of this particular year, let me first discuss as to how I would be approaching this year's interim budget. So you must understand that whenever the finance minister presents the budget from the perspective of Indian economy. That is, the finance minister would announce some major initiatives for agriculture, industry, women, children, and so on. So the finance minister is presenting budget from the perspective of Indian economy and not from the perspective of the civil service aspirants. Which means when you are approaching the budget, you must convert the budget into prelims and main centric knowledge. And that is what we'll be doing as part of the discussion of the interim budget of this particular year. Now, understanding the importance of the interim budget is quite important because I have seen a lot of students spending a lot of time on the budget. Especially, I have seen students mugging up facts and figures related to, let's say, the income tax collection, corporate tax collection, the GST, and so on. But we know that UPSC does not normally ask questions about facts and figures. UPSC generally asks questions with respect to important trends. So before you start understanding interim budget, you should know what way questions are asked in the previous year prelims. And that is what we are going to do. So let us understand as to how I would be approaching the interim budget. First and foremost, as you can see here, we'll start with the overall importance of the budget from the perspective of UPSC prelims as well as mains, where I will discuss as to how questions have been asked in the previous year prelims as well as mains from the perspective of the budget. Based upon that, you'll get to know as to how should you prepare for budget, especially from the upcoming prelims as well as the mains examination. So that's the first thing that we will do. We'll decode the importance of the budget. Second, we'll discuss the basics of the budget. I'm pretty sure all of you know that this being an election year, the government has not presented a full union budget. Rather, the government has presented the interim budget. So most of you must be confused as to what exactly is interim budget. In what way interim budget is different from full union budget? So we'll understand the basics first. That is, what is interim budget, in what way it is different from the union budget. In fact, we will solve one of a PYQ, previous year question, with respect to interim budget as well as some practice questions as well. Apart from that, some of you may have also come across a word called as vote on account. This is actually part of Article 116 of the Indian Constitution. So what exactly is the difference between vote on account and interim budget, which is also part of your basics? We will cover that. Having understood the basics of the interim budget, then we will discuss the important aspects of public finance. What aspects of public finance? Now, if you see the previous year prelims, normally questions are asked with respect to important trends in fiscal parameters. Fiscal parameters such as fiscal deficit, tax to GDP ratio, share of direct and indirect taxes. So those important trends we will cover it from the perspective of your upcoming prelims 2024. So that we will cover here. So we will also integrate, we'll also take up some practice MCQs as well. And apart from discussing all of these aspects, since this year being a interim budget, there are no major announcements related to taxation. There are no major announcement with respect to changes in policies. So obviously UPSC has less things to ask from this year's interim budget in the upcoming prelims. So naturally UPSC may ask you questions from the previous year budget as well as economic survey. So as soon as we are done with the discussion of the interim budget, I will share a link for the test of the previous budget and economic survey. So the previous year's budget and economic survey, on that particular thing, I have prepared 100 practice questions. So you will get access to that test, and please do attempt that particular practice test as soon as we are done with the discussion of the interim budget. Further, once we are done with that, we will carry out a detailed analysis of interim budget. That is one thing. Not just interim budget, you must know that since this year's is an interim budget, we do not have an economic survey. Economic survey is not normally presented with the interim budget. But instead of economic survey, this particular year, what we have is an annual economic review, which is published by the finance ministry. So if you are thinking ki you don't have to read economic survey this year, you are partially correct, because as such there is no separate economic survey, but instead of economic survey we have annual review of finance ministry. That aspects will have to cover in the budget of this year. Apart from annual review of the finance ministry, what we also have is a collection of essays written by chief economic advisor. Now this is quite important because in this collection of essays of chief economic advisor, they have highlighted a number of important aspects. These are like most burning issues before the Indian economy. Some of these issues such as the issue of credit rating agencies such as Standard & Poor, Moody's and so on. You may have probably heard that these credit rating agencies, they are little biased, they are little unfair towards the Indian economy, wherein they have not upgraded our soaring credit ratings. So the chief economic advisor has raised some important concerns about the credit rating agencies. Similarly, now there's a debate in India, that is whether we should focus on reducing inequality or should we focus on promotion of growth. The reason being, it is said these two things are in direct conflict with each other. That is, you cannot reduce inequality and you cannot promote growth together. So what should India do? That aspect is also covered in this collection of essay by the chief economic advisor. So we will cover that also in the interim budget discussion as well. So as you can see, these things we will cover by adopting a 360-degree approach, just like the way we have been carrying out the analysis of the budget and the economic survey in the previous year. So we will have a detailed discussion of the budget under broad themes, that is agriculture, industry, social infrastructure and so on. Then we will also discuss important prelims and main space questions as well. As far as today's discussion is concerned, let me tell you, in today's discussion, I have planned to cover 1, 2 and 3 aspects. that is importance of the interim budget, the basics of the budget, and the snapshot of public finance. This is what I will be covering in today's discussion. As far as the detailed aspects, the detailed analysis of the interim budget is concerned, the detailed analysis, I shall be covering it in the next week, that is around 9th of February. So around the same time, we'll have a detailed discussion on these aspects related to interim budget. I hope this part is clear, right? So keeping in mind these aspects, let's start with the first thing. The first thing is understanding the importance of the budget. Okay, let's see in what way questions are asked in the budget in the UPSC examination. You can see the first type of question which you can get in the UPSC exam is some current related aspects related to your budget. In what way? Let me just give you a simple example. You can see this particular question. This particular question was asked in prelims 2023, the latest prelims. And as you can see, this question is about SHG, self-help groups. Can you just read the question? SHG was originally initiated by SBI by providing microcredit to the financially deprived. In SHG, all the members of the group take responsibility for a loan that an individual member takes. The RRBs and scheduled commercial banks support SHGs. Now, this was a question asked in 2023. Now, let's understand as to why was this question asked in 2023. You must understand that SHGs, self-help groups, have always been part of our development agenda. So, we have been trying to promote SHGs in order to empower women. But the question is, why was this asked only in 2023 and why not before 2023? The reason is pretty simple. If you see last year's budget, in the last year's budget, the government of India sought to promote self-help groups in order to empower women. And that was the initiative announced by the government in last year's budget. So accordingly, as you can see in last year budget discussion, I had not just discussed about what is the government proposal. I have discussed everything about SHGs, like what do you mean by SHG? How did the SHG movement start? Who supports SHG? How many SHGs we have? What are the benefits? What are the problems and challenges? It's like what we call it as a 360-degree approach of SHG. Now, because we knew that a question on SHG could be asked in prelims as well as mains, I had discussed that kind of, I had discussed in detail the topic of SHG. So, as you can see, accordingly, in the budget of, accordingly in prelims 2023, we had this particular question as well. What I'm trying to tell you is, let's say there is a particular initiative announced by the government in this year's interim budget. Accordingly, what you must do is, you must understand the detailed aspects of that particular initiative. Take for example, in this year's budget, the government of India has decided to give more focus on the promotion of dairy sector. So based upon that, don't you think a question can be asked with respect to dairy sector? The question is, what aspects of dairy sector becomes important? For example, a question can be asked with respect to the overall trends in the milk production of India. That aspect can be very well asked, right? So that is how we should prepare from the budget. There's just, if you know the initiative which the government has taken, that is not sufficient. You have to convert that initiative into prelims and main centric knowledge. And that is how you should be more clear with respect to budget. Second aspect, sometimes you have seen that questions are directly asked in the prelims as well as the mains examination from the budget as well as economic survey. What kind of question? Let me just show you. You can see here, prelims 2022, a direct question upon how does the government basically borrow money? A share of household financial savings goes towards the government borrowings, which is correct. Dated securities issued at market rates in auction form a large component of internal debt. The right answer is both 1 and 2. And this particular question was directly asked from the budget. Not just that, please concentrate on this question asked in mains 2023, the latest mains. The question is, how does e-technology help farmers in production and marketing of agriculture produce? Explain it. The question is, why was this asked in mains 2023? The reason is pretty simple. In budget, last year's budget, the government of India had given a proposal that the government would set up agriculture accelerated fund, which will in turn support agri-tech startups by young entrepreneurs in rural areas. So it's basically an initiative which the government has taken to promote startups in agriculture, right? So based upon that, in last year's budget, we had discussed in detail the digital technologies in agriculture, like benefits, initiatives and challenges. And if you have seen the question asked in mains 2023, the question was the benefits only. And there, as you can see, I have incorporated some important case studies which you could have directly used in the mains 2023, like Jai Kisan, Fasal, ENAM, Ninja Card and so on. I hope you are getting the point here, right? So the first thing is current affairs. The second aspect is you can get a direct question in the prelims as well as the mains examination. And third aspect, if you see, the third aspect is you can go through the budget and the economic survey by going through the budget and economic survey. You can have a lot of value addition points in the mains examination. A case in point is in mains 2021, we had a question. Do you think Indian economy has recently experienced V-shaped recovery? Now, why was this asked? Because the economic survey had pointed out that the Indian economy has registered V-shaped recovery in the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic. Government said that we are having a V-shaped recovery, but on the other hand, it was opposed by some of the economists who were of the opinion that India is not showing a V-shaped recovery. Instead, India is showing a K-shaped recovery. In fact, some economists said it is not K, it could be W. Now, because it was in news, that is why in mains 2021 we had this question. And if you want to substantiate that Indian economy has indeed registered V-shaped economic recovery, from where will you quote the points in favor? Obviously, you will have to quote the points in favor from that year's economic survey. So that is where the economic survey becomes important, right? So I hope you are getting a point as to how you should read the budget and economic survey. Do not read budget and economic survey as an economist. Read budget and economic survey as a serious student preparing for the UPSC examination, where you have to convert budget and economic survey into UPSC centric prelims and mains knowledge. I hope this part is clear. Having understood this part, let's take up the next aspect. The next aspect here is a question which was asked in prelims 2011. What is the difference between vote on account and interim budget? All of you, please have a look at the question. Read the question carefully and please respond the answer in the chat box. I just want to see your answer in the chat box. Just go to the question. Can anyone answer it? The provision of vote on account is used by the regular government, while an interim budget is a provision used by a caretaker government. Vote on account only deals with the expenditure in the government's budget, while an interim budget includes both expenditure and receipts. Yes. Can you let me know the answer in the chat box? Ashok says 2 only. Others, Anisha says 2. Madhvi says C. Charishma, Anjali, Pranjali, Kiran. Kiran is saying one is wrong. But what about second, Kiran? Aditya Singh says D. Okay. Shiv Prasad, Piyush says 2. Dheeraj says C. Sakshi says B. Okay. Pranjali says 2. Okay. Let's see how many of you are correct here. Okay. Let's understand this. Let's read the first one. Provision of vote on account is used by a regular government, while interim budget is provision used by caretaker government. What is a caretaker government? Caretaker government is basically a government which right now does not has a majority in the Lok Sabha and is appointed for time being. So is the interim budget presented by the caretaker government? Obviously not. Interim budget is a budget which is presented by the government which is going to face the elections. So in a simple meaning, interim budget is presented in an election year. So obviously this is incorrect. Vote on account only deals with the expenditure in the government's budget, while an interim budget includes both expenditure and receipts. Yes, it is. So those of you who have given the answer as B, that is 2 only, they are correct. Do not worry, we are going to discuss in detail what is interim budget, what is union budget, what is the difference between the two, and in what way interim budget is different from a vote on account. Do not worry about it. We are going to discuss that in detail. But I just wanted to show you as to how questions have been asked in the previous year prelims. So once we discuss those aspects, the basics, we'll come back to solve these practice questions. We can see the practice question number 1, the first practice question. Then you can see this practice question. If you want to answer, if you have to answer this practice question, you have to know the nitty-gritties, the detailed aspects of in what way vote on account is different from interim budget. Do not worry, I will discuss it and I'll come back to this part. So let's start with the discussion of union budget and the interim budget. So what is the first important difference? You should just know that union budget is a budget which is presented in a normal year, whereas interim budget is a budget which is presented in an election year. So when the elections are going to be conducted in that particular year, if the government is presenting the budget, that budget itself is called as interim budget. Look at the word interim. Interim, if I could explain to you in most simplest of words, interim simply means it is a stop gap arrangement. It's like government which is in power right now is going to face elections. So government will present the interim budget. That interim budget will be applicable until the elections are held. And after the elections are held, the new government comes into power. And that time the new government will present a full-fledged union budget. So this is what is this concept of interim budget. Okay. Constitutional requirement. I hope all of you know that there is a separate article called as Article 112 of the Indian Constitution which deals with the presentation of union budget. You must be knowing that the word budget as such does not find a mention in Article 112. Article 112 says annual financial statement, right? As far as presentation of interim budget is concerned, there is no explicit provision in Article 112. Please understand that. So it is mainly presented as part of parliamentary convention which has got evolved in India. So in particular, Article 112 explicitly does not say that the government should compulsorily present interim budget. It is just a convention. Please understand that. Second aspect, applicability. Applicability. So Seelam is asking, what if the same government comes again? the same government comes back to power, most of the policies in the interim budget will obviously continue. Apart from continuation of the same policies in the union budget, they may introduce new policies as well. So if you are preparing for civil services this year, the burden on you is actually higher, because for you there are two budgets. So if you are happy that this time there is no economic survey, let me remind you that you have interim budget this time, and then you will have a full union budget in July. And in July, apart from full union budget, you will have economic survey. And remember, July is when it is just before your mains examination. So for your mains, what becomes important that time is union budget as well as economic survey. So that way the burden is higher on you. Applicability as far as union budget is concerned, it is applicable for the entire financial year. So entire financial year, it means it is applicable from April 1st to March 31st. But if you see interim budget, it is usually applicable until the new government takes over, and the new government will formulate its own union budget. So that way, if you see the interim budget which is presented this year, it will be applicable until July. That is when the new government is expected to take over. Can it include finance bill? And what is finance bill? I'm pretty sure you have studied about the finance bill in your Indian polity. Finance bill is actually presented along with the budget documents, and the finance bill will have some important changes to the tax laws. So if the government wants to introduce some important changes to tax laws, what tax laws? Let's say government wants to change the income tax slab, the corporate tax rate, excise duty, customs duty. Then the government would have to make amendments to the tax laws, because you must have read in your in your polity classes that government, if you want to collect the tax, the government has to cannot collect the tax without the authority of law. So the government has to change the tax law. Then the government must introduce the finance bill. Apart from that, if government wants to introduce some legal changes, some changes to important laws, like example, last time government introduced CBDC. Now while introducing CBDC, government last time had amended the RBI Act 1934. So this amendment of RBI Act 1934 was incorporated as part of finance bill. So in a nutshell, finance bill means two things. One, changes to the tax laws, and some important changes to the law which the government wants to introduce as part of the budget. Both the two things are incorporated here. So normally in union budget, finance bill is included because the government would want to make changes to the tax laws. As far as interim budget is concerned, now you must understand, in India a healthy convention has developed where generally, I'm stressing on the word generally, that government does not normally tinker with the tax rate. Government normally does not change the tax rate. So if the government does not change the tax rate, so normally the government will not amend the tax laws. But do you think finance bill is presented in the interim budget or not? If I could ask you, as a matter of convention itself, take a guess. Anyone? Does the interim budget include the finance bill? What do you think? Yes? Anyone? Okay. No. Aditi says no. Kushika also says no. Okay, let me tell you what it is. Whether we have okay, let's see here what generally happens. You must understand that the government is not making any changes to tax laws. The government is continuing with the same tax rate. even to continue with the same tax rate, the government has to introduce a finance bill. So please understand that in the interim budget, the finance bill is introduced in order to continue with the existing tax rate. For example, it will say that from April 1 onwards, that is April 1st, 2024, this financial year onwards, the income tax rates, the corporate tax rate, all of this are going to continue. So that is why in the interim budget, they'll also include the finance bill. Please understand. So whether the government changes the tax laws or not, finance bill is included. Obviously, if the government is changing the tax law, finance bill must be there. Even if the government is not changing the tax law, government is deciding to continue with the existing tax rate, government should at least say that for financial year, that is from April 1st onwards, the same tax rate will continue. That is where the government will introduce the finance bill. Apart from that, please do know, like I said, a healthy convention has developed in India where normally the finance minister does not tinker with the tax rate, but there has been instances where the finance minister has introduced some changes in the tax rates in the interim budget itself. Case in point is last time when interim budget was presented by the then finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, the finance minister then had introduced some changes to the excise duty rates. So sometimes this is also done. I hope you are getting this point. So you can see, however, in some of the previous interim budget, convention has not been followed. Government has changed the tax rate. This thing becomes important from the perspective of your prelims examination. Please understand that. Apart from that, just look at this. Does it include vote on account? And what is vote on account? Let's quickly understand this concept of vote on account. I'm pretty sure some of you must be already aware about the vote on account. I'm going to discuss this for the benefit of all. Plus, for those people who already know about it, it will be a revision. So what exactly is vote on account? You must understand that now the budget is presented on 1st of February. But earlier, the budget used to be presented in the last week of February. And we all know that in the budget, there are two important things which are introduced by the finance minister. One is the finance bill, which is what I have already discussed. Finance bill deals with the income side of the budget, and then there is appropriation bill. This appropriation bill deals with the expenditure side of the budget. So basically, the appropriation bill seeks approval of the parliament for the withdrawal of money from CFI, that is Consolidated Fund of India, as we know. Now, earlier, you must understand, the budget was presented in last week of February. And what used to happen is this appropriation bill, where the government is taking approval of the parliament to withdraw money from CFI, this appropriation bill normally used to be passed only by end of May. But you know that financial year, if you see, financial year starts on April 1st, but appropriation bill is getting passed only by the end of May. So there are 2 months, April and May, where the financial year has already started, but yet government has not taken approval of the parliament to withdraw money from CFI, Consolidated Fund of India. So that is when government used to present what is called as vote on account. Vote on account is provided under Article 116. Under this vote on account, the government used to seek approval of the parliament to withdraw money from CFI for next 2 months. That is for the month of April to May. It used to so happen that before the financial year starts, that is before April 1, government already has got the vote on account passed. So government will withdraw money from CFI for the month of April and May, and after May, by then already appropriation bill is passed, so government can withdraw money. So vote on account, you must understand, was always part of union budget. When union budget used to be presented in last week of February. But now if you see, the budget is presented on 1st of February, which means the budget normally, that is appropriation bill, normally gets passed by end of March itself. That is even before the financial year starts. Appropriation bill is already passed. Financial year starts on April 1. By then the appropriation bill is already passed. So government has already taken approval. Which means now there is no need for vote on account in the union budget. I hope everyone has got to know now the important aspects of vote on account and appropriation bill, because you have to know the biggest difference between vote on account and interim budget later. So keeping this as a background, let's quickly have a look at the important difference now. Union budget now does not include vote on account, because earlier vote on account was needed as the budget used to be presented in the last week of February and budget was passed only in the end of May. However, now vote on account is not needed because the budget is presented on 1st of February and the appropriation bill is passed by the before April 1st. What about interim budget then? Do you think interim budget will include vote on account? Yes, what do you think? Does the interim budget include vote on account? Please respond. Yes, good. So now we have a vote on account. So understand that vote on account is part of interim budget. So the government takes approval of the parliament to withdraw money from consolidated fund of India until the union budget gets passed. So it's like vote on account is part of interim budget. How is it different? Interim budget deals with both receipts and expenditure, whereas vote on account will deal only with what aspects? The aspect of the expenditure only. Okay. So now coming to the next point, that is the difference between interim budget and vote on account. Let's have a quickly the difference between these two. Interim budget, it is presented only in an election year, whereas vote on account, earlier it was part of union budget when the budget was presented in last week of February. Interim budget does not find a mention in the constitution, but vote on account finds a mention in the constitution. It is mentioned in article 116 of the constitution. What does it include? Details of receipts and expenditure, but vote on account will only deal with what? Expenditure, where the government is seeking approval of the government to withdraw money, approval of the parliament, to withdraw money from CFI. Can interim budget make changes to tax rate? The word which is important is, can it include changes to tax rate? Yes, indeed. If it wants, it can introduce changes to tax rate. What about vote on account? Vote on account does not deal with the receipts only. So obviously it cannot make changes to the tax rate. Relationship, please remember this important aspect. Interim budget includes vote on account. So if I could show you in terms of Venn diagram, The bigger circle here represents interim budget, which has both two parts, which is the receipts and expenditure. And one aspect of interim budget is your vote on account, wherein the vote on account will deal with only one aspect, which is your expenditure. That's the important difference. So keeping this as a background, let's quickly take up some practice questions. I hope everyone is ready. Let's take up the practice questions now. Already we have covered this particular practice question. Let's start with MCQ number 1. Please take your time, all of you. MCQ number 1. Let's see how many of you will be able to correctly answer this. The PDF for this lecture will be available immediately after the class. You don't have to worry about it. Yes. What do you think? Anjali says C. Aryan says C. Madhvi C. Abhishek Jha C. Santosh C. Okay, I can see most of you are giving me the right answer. Statement 1 is correct, while statement 2 is incorrect. Very good. So, Article 112 of the Indian Constitution does not provide for presentation of interim budget in an election year, right? Some of you say, give me the answer as B. Please check. B means both the statements are correct. The second statement is not correct. Please have a look. Article 112 does not provide for presentation of interim budget. Please have a look at the second MCQ, all of you. Which among the following best describes the difference between interim budget and vote on account? Let's see how many of you will be able to answer this correctly. And when you're responding, please type the MCQ number. How do I know whether you're responding for MCQ 1 or MCQ 2? Okay, you can see now. Okay, Anisha says D, Aryan D, Nidhi D, Akshay D, Girraj P, Kushika says D, Piyush D. Okay, I have moved from the completely screen. Okay, just have a look at the question. Niveda says D. Okay, good. So Shristi says D. Okay, fine. You can just have a look at these statements. Interim budget is presented in an election year, while vote on account is always part of union budget. First part is correct. Interim budget is presented in an election year, while vote on account is always part of union budget. No, it is not always part of union budget. The interim budget deals with both receipts and expenditure. First part is correct. While vote on account only deals with the receipts. No, vote on account does not deal with receipt. It deals with the expenditure. The interim budget is applicable only for a part of the financial year, which is to a certain extent correct, while the vote on account is applicable for the entire financial year. The second part is incorrect. So the only answer is D. You can see the interim budget deals with both receipts and expenditure, while vote on account deals with the expenditure as part of the interim budget. So that is how you should be knowing the right answer. I hope everyone is clear with this, right? So keeping this, let's move to the next part quickly. Basics of the budget. appropriation bill is not part of the interim budget. Appropriation bill normally is not part because there is already this vote on account. So already they have taken a permission to withdraw money from Consolidated Fund of India until the union budget comes into picture. Yeah. So you can see the basics of budget. This was a question asked in prelims 2020. Along with the budget, the finance minister also places other documents before the parliament which include the macroeconomic framework statement. The aforesaid document is presented because it is mandated under the FRBM Act. So this is one way where you can get a question on the basics of budget. So what we'll do quickly, we will look into the other aspects. Like we'll take up the topic of Consolidated Fund of India, Contingency Fund and Public Account of India. Let's quickly look into these things. Okay. I hope everyone knows that whenever the finance minister presents the budget, along with the budget documents, the finance minister presents a number of documents. There are some documents that are mandated under the Indian Constitution. There are some documents that are mandated under the FRBM Act. And there are some documents that are presented due to the parliamentary convention. So just like how, we got a question on macroeconomic framework statement in the previous year prelims, you might get a question on other aspects. That is what we are going to cover one by one, starting with the documents that are mandated under the Indian Constitution, which is the document which the finance minister presents because it is mandated under the Indian Constitutional statement. I hope most of you must have heard about this. It is presented in accordance with Article 112 of the Indian Constitution. When you look at the word annual financial statement, the word is a misnomer because when you look at the word annual financial statement, you might think that the government is providing the details of receipts and expenditure for just 1 year. It is not for 1 year, it is for 3 years, as you can see very clearly. For the present year, estimates. For the next year also, estimates. And for the previous year, it is the actual receipt and expenditure. Further, the receipts and expenditure of the government, they should be presented under 3 heads. We all know that: Consolidated Fund, Contingency Fund and Public Account of India. So this is one annual financial statement. Then the government will also provide for demand for grants. What exactly is demand for grants and how is it different from appropriation bill? Let's try to understand. That is, demand for grants versus appropriation bill. Let's quickly look into these things. I hope everyone knows that when you look at the expenditure of the government, that expenditure of the government is categorized into 2 types. Expenditure which is charged upon Consolidated Fund of India. The expenditure which is charged upon CFI, and then there is other form of expenditure. That is, other expenditure means which is not charged upon the CFI. When you look at the expenditure which is charged upon the Consolidated Fund of India, this is generally the expenditure which is earmarked for constitutional bodies like UPSC, Election Commission, Office of CAG and so on. And for this expenditure which is charged upon the CFI, at most we can have only discussion, but they are not subject to vote by the Lok Sabha. Whereas the other forms of expenditure, apart from the expenditure which is charged upon CFI, discussion takes place in the Lok Sabha, and after the discussion there is a voting on the other expenditure. Now this other expenditure on which discussion and vote is taking place, that itself is what is called as demand for grants. I hope this part is clear. So in the demand for grants, what normally happens is every ministry or department will say how much money it wants for the upcoming financial year. Normally one ministry will present for one demand for grant. But you must understand there are some very big ministries and departments. So those big ministries and departments might present for 2 demand for grants. So that is why you can see total number of demand for grants. How many we have? We have 102. All of these demand for grants are actually voted upon by the Lok Sabha. So individually demand for grants of different ministries and departments are voted upon. That is, Parliament is approving this expenditure by the ministries and departments. Now there is only one aspect which is approved, that is, we are approving the expenditure by the ministries. We have to go one step forward now. What is that? We have to now provide approval to the government to withdraw money from CFI. And that approval to the government to withdraw money from CFI is actually given through appropriation bill. I hope everyone has understood the difference between demand for grants and appropriation bill. Demand for grants, individually, a ministries will provide as to how much money they are going to spend for the upcoming financial year. That is approved. That is demand for grants. But appropriation bill is you are giving an approval to the government to withdraw money from CFI. That is what is appropriation bill. That is the basic difference. So that is the next part. Next, you can see then we have what is called as next what is have is finance bill. I told you about the finance bill as well. Finance bill is making some important changes to tax rate and some important legal changes as well. Is everyone clear with this? Demand for grants was the appropriation bill. If you have any doubts, you can ask me after we are done with the class. Clear, Aditi? Do not worry, I'll explain this once I'm done with the class after. Because I guess most of the people have understood this. If you're not understood, I'll discuss it after the class. Next, there are some documents mandated under FRBM Act, which is macroeconomic framework statement, medium-term fiscal policy statement, fiscal policy strategy statement. And then there are some documents which are presented due to the parliamentary convention, because the parliamentary convention has evolved and because of which we provide for expenditure budget. Expenditure budget provides for expenditure by ministries and departments on various central sector and centrally sponsored schemes. Each and every ministry will say this is the amount of money we are spending on central sector schemes, this is the amount of money we are going to spend on centrally sponsored schemes. And then we have a receipt budget, which is like details of tax and non-tax revenue receipts and capital receipts. And this is as per the parliamentary convention. Is this part clear? Okay, so let's quickly move to the next part. The next part here is funds. I hope everyone knows about CFI. Let's quickly go to CFI. CFI basically includes all the money which the government collects in the form of tax and non-tax revenue. Whatever loans the government has raised, apart from recovery of loans. That is, if center has given loans to the states and it has recovered the loans, all of that is part of your CFI. You have studied that in your polity classes. Tax and non-tax revenue, loans raised by the government, as well as receipts from a recovery of loans. Is there a need for prior approval to withdraw money from CFI? Yes. It is mentioned in Article 266 as well. What about Contingency Fund of India? You must understand, when it comes to Contingency Fund of India, which is provided under Article 267, Constitution empowers Parliament to establish contingency fund through a law. So the Constitution says that Parliament should make a law to set up Contingency Fund of India. Accordingly, the government has established the contingency fund through Contingency Fund of India Act of 1950. It is placed at the disposal of President to meet exigencies, that is some emergency conditions. So during that time, the money will be withdrawn from Contingency Fund of India, and you can see it is held on behalf of the President by the Secretary Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, which means it is operated not by President directly, but it is operated by the Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. And if you know the Department of Economic Affairs, it's actually the department which has been entrusted with the responsibility of making the union budget. And this is what is important from the perspective of your prelims examination, because the changes have been introduced in the budget of 21-22. So I can see the first change. Overall corpus of contingency fund of India has increased from 500 crores to 30,000 crores. That is why it is important. Second important change, please have a look at the second change. 40% of the corpus. How much is the corpus? 30,000 crore. So 40% of the corpus will now be placed with the Secretary, Department of Expenditure. So what has got changed now? Earlier the entire corpus used to be with Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. Now 40% of the corpus will be with the Secretary, Department of Expenditure, while the remaining corpus, that is 60%, will be with Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. So this has got changed recently. That is why it is important. Is there a need for prior approval of the Parliament to withdraw money? No. What we need is a ex post facto approval. Ex post facto approval basically means you spend money. After you spend money, then you take the approval of the Parliament. Ashi is asking as to why is the corpus of contingency fund of India increased. Please have a look at the year. What is that year in which it has increased? 21-22. What happened around that year? Pandemic, right? So that is one of the reasons as to why we decided to increase the overall corpus. Please remember this important change has taken place. Public account of India. What does it include? Number one, money which is kept with the government by the people. So people are depositing some money with the government because they have trust with the government. All of that money becomes part of public account of India. What money people are depositing with the government? For example, people might deposit small savings deposit in post offices. People might deposit money with the government in the form of provident fund. That is part of public account of India. Apart from that, the money which the government is setting aside for specific purpose like education, health, etc. is also part of public account of India. What is that money? Let's try to understand that. I hope all of you know that government imposes a number of cess. Now question is, in what way cess is different from a tax? When the government imposes the tax, whatever tax money the government collects, that tax money the government can utilize for whatever purpose the government wants to use it for. Like income tax, the government can use it for whatever purpose, like construction of road, education, health, and so on. But when the government imposes the cess money should always be utilized for the purpose it is imposed for. For example, if the government is imposing education cess, obviously it has to be used only for the purpose of education. So what happens is, when the government imposes cess initially goes into CFI. CFI means Consolidated Fund of India. From CFI, with the approval of the Parliament, the money goes into public account of India. And in public account of India, it is in a separate fund. You can see here, Central Road and Infrastructure Fund, Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Nidhi, which is like health cess. Prarambhik Siksha Kosh, Madhyamik and Uchatar Siksha Kosh, it is for education cess. GST Compensation Fund, monetization of National Highways Fund. If the government is monetizing the highways, now what is monetization? government is transferring the operation and management of national highways to the private sector. So it's like saying government will transfer a national highway to the private sector for its operation and maintenance. In return, the private sector will give upfront money to the government. So when the private sector gives an upfront money to the government, that money is included in the monetization of National Highways Fund. And how will private sector recover that money? Obviously, the private sector will erect a toll, and from the toll, it will recover that money which it has given to the government. Then we have Agriculture Infrastructure and Development Fund, NDRF. I hope you must have heard of it. National Disaster Response Fund. Then National Investment Fund. Whenever the government undertakes disinvestment of PSUs, all that money which the government gets through disinvestment of PSUs goes into National Investment Fund, and as the name suggests, National Investment Fund will be used for promoting investment. Do we need approval of the Parliament to withdraw money from public account of India? Please respond. Do you think the government needs the approval of the Parliament to withdraw money from public account of India? Ashok says yes. Yes. Santosh says yes. Abhishek says no. Anisha says no. Aryan says no. Okay, let's try to understand this. Please have a look. Is there a need for prior approval of Parliament to withdraw money from public account of India? No prior approval is needed for withdrawal of public money. Which public money I am talking about? This money. Whatever money the public is keeping with the government as a matter of trust, to withdraw that money, no parliamentary approval is needed. But if the government wants to withdraw this money, which it has kept in separate fund, like Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh, Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Nidhi, to withdraw that money, approval of the Parliament is needed. Please understand that this is a little confusing. So, can you see in what way public account of India is different from CFI and contingency fund? In case of consolidated fund of India, always you need Parliament's approval. In contingency fund also you need Parliament approval, but that Parliament approval is ex post facto, which means you spend money and then you take approval of the Parliament. And this, there are some things where prior approval is needed, and there are some things where approval is not needed. Please understand that part. So keeping this in the background, let's take up a practice question. Look at the practice question. Practice MCQ number 3. Which among the following gets credited to the consolidated fund of India? Please take your time. Public deposits with the public sector banks, public deposits with the post offices, cess collected by the center, transfer of dividend from the RBI to the government. Okay, Sunil Singh says A, Rahil says B, Piyush says B, Nidhi says B. Okay, I can see most of you are responding the answer with B. Okay, let's try to understand. Public deposits with public sector banks, it is not part of consolidated fund of India because it is not a receipt for the government. It is a receipt or it's a deposit for the public sector bank like SBI. In fact, it has nothing to do with the government receipts. Government will never account that. Public deposit with the post offices, it is not part of consolidated fund of India. It becomes part of public account of India. Cess collected by the center, I told you, whatever cess the government collects initially goes into CFI. It gets credited to CFI. So yes. Transfer of dividend from the RBI to the government, yes. Because dividend, you must understand what it is. It is a non-tax revenue. So whatever tax revenue and non-tax revenue the government collects, all of that goes into consolidated fund of India. So right answer is only 2. Good. I hope all of you have got this point, right? Chalo. So let's move to the next question. Have a look at the next question. Consider the following statements related to contingency fund of India. What do you think is the answer? The fund has been established by the parliament through a separate law. Parul says B, Ritul A, Aryan B, Charishma B, Samyak A. Okay, Aditi B, Sapna A, Niveda A. Okay. The corpus of the fund is obviously not 500 crore. I told you it has got increased to 30,000 crores. The entire fund is held by the president, is held on the behalf of president by the Secretary Department of Economic Affairs. No. The reason being the latest amendment which has been introduced where 40% of the corpus is with the Secretary Department of Expenditure, not the entire part. That is why it is incorrect. But this is correct. Right answer is only 1. Look at this. Next one. Which among the following are part of public account of India? Please have a look at the question. Shashank says D, Samyak C, Satish A, Khushika D, Dilip C, Anisha C, Dinesh C. Okay, let's see this. सबसे पहले let's look at the first point. Public deposits with public sector banks. Public deposit with public sector bank will never become part of public account of India. Please understand that. It is just a deposit of public sector bank only. National Small Savings Fund, yes. All of that money which the people keep with the government in small savings goes into NSSF. GST Compensation Fund, yes. Like I showed you. National Investment Fund, yes. And the right answer is only 3. All of you have given the answer as only 3. Good. Look at this question. Which among the following documents are mandated to be presented along with the budget documents under the Indian Constitution? Under the Indian Constitution, which all documents should be presented? Finance bill should be presented. We know that. Demand for grant should be presented. Macroeconomic framework statement is also presented with the budget document, which is correct. But it is not presented under the Indian Constitution. This is presented under the FRBM Act. That is why it is incorrect. The right answer is only 2. Look at that question. You can just see the question here. Consider the following statement related to annual financial statement. Annual financial statement provides details of receipts and expenditure of only the present and the next financial year. It is incorrect because it will give details of receipts and expenditure for present year, next year, as well as the previous financial year. This is why it is incorrect. The annual financial statement should distinguish its revenue expenditure from other expenditure. Yes, it should distinguish its revenue expenditure from other expenditure. And is it mandated under the Indian Constitution? Yes, it is given in the Indian Constitution itself. So right answer in this case, okay, there are only two statements, so there's two only. That is the question. Clear? Okay. Now let's quickly start looking at the snapshot of the government finances, that is revenue receipts, revenue expenditure, capital receipts and capital expenditure. Now this is what we are going to discuss in detail. What is the budget size? You can see the budget size in 22-23 is 45 lakh crore. Now what is this budget size? Which year's budget size am I referring to? That is what is important. The reason is, I told you, when we provide for annual financial statement, the government gives details of the past financial year, the present financial year, as well as the details of the next financial year. Now question is, if you are preparing for UPSC prelims, should I know the details of receipts and expenditure for past, present and next? Obviously not. You should know the details of receipts and expenditure for only one financial year. And which should be that financial year? The previous financial year or next financial year? It is not previous or next. It is always the present financial year. So that is why I am looking at this thing. Okay. So please look at that point. Right. So you can see that is 45 lakh crore is the total size of the budget. So you should always look into the present thing. And look at this point. The budget in India, it is said to be balanced budget. Why it is balanced budget? The reason is very simple. The total expenditure of the government, total expenditure means revenue expenditure as well as the capital expenditure. Total expenditure of the government is equal to total receipts. What are the total receipts? Revenue receipts plus capital receipts. Now, how come budget in India is balanced? Because all the while you know that our expenditure is more than the receipt. The only reason why expenditure is equal to receipts is because in our receipts we will also include what? Borrowings. So when the government borrows money, that borrowed money is part of our capital receipts. That is why you know the budget in India is a balanced budget. Please understand that. So it's not that budget is balanced. We are making it balanced by borrowing money and accounting that borrowed money as part of our capital receipt. So that is why you can see RE is 35.5 lakh crore plus 9.5 lakh crore, which is how much? 45 lakh crore. 27 plus 18. 27 is your revenue receipts, capital receipts is 18, it becomes 45. So let's look into the revenue receipts part. These are the things which are important from the perspective of your prelims examination. I hope everyone knows the components of the receipts. You can just have a look. Tax revenue, interest receipts, dividends of PSUs, user charges, grants in aid, non-tax revenue, all of this is part of your revenue receipts. Gross tax collection. What is gross tax collection? How much tax has the government collected totally? That becomes the gross tax collection. Net tax revenue. What is net tax revenue? You can see from the total tax which the government has collected, we will deduct two things. What are those two things? Number one, state share of taxes. I hope you must be knowing, whatever the tax which the central government collects, a certain percentage of that tax the central government is required to distribute it among the states. That is based upon the recommendations of finance commission. So let's say this is the total gross tax revenue. This gross tax revenue gets distributed between center and state based upon the recommendation of FC, that is Finance Commission, which has been provided under Article 280. So we are deducting that state share of taxes plus the money which the center is transferring to NDRF. So tax to GDP ratio, if you see, it is 11.6 in India now. Please remember that. It is 11.6. And if you see the share of taxes, there are two types of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Share of direct taxes right now is 6.6 and share of indirect taxes is 5%. So you can see 6.6 plus 5, how much it is? 11.6. So share of direct taxes is higher than the share of indirect taxes presently. And if I could ask you, among all the taxes which the government is collecting, let me just tell you the tax which the government is collecting: GST, income tax, corporate tax, excise duty, custom duty. If I could ask you, among these 5 taxes, which tax do you think account for the highest share for the center? For the center, among these 5 taxes, which tax account for the highest share? Anyone? Let's see who will get it right. Ashok says GST, Mani says GST, JMD says corporate tax, Anisha says GST, okay, Piyush says GST, okay. Let's try to understand which tax is actually higher. And this could be quite important in your prelims examination. Let me just show you. Decreasing order of taxes. Can you see? सबसे ज्यादा टैक्स कहां से आ रहा है? Income tax. So those of you are saying GST, it is not GST. Now it is income tax. This is an important change which has taken place for the present financial year. Let me just show you. Let me just explain to you directly from the budget document. You can see this is the tax receipt, and I told you you have to focus here for the present financial year. This need to focus on the revised estimates of 23-24 for the UPSC prelims, and you can see among the taxes, just concentrate here. Income tax collection is higher than the GST collection. Can you see the fine difference between these two? And when we say GST, which is like 95, this GST will include 2 components: central GST and GST compensation cess. What will it not include? It will not include your state GST. Why it will not include state GST? Because central government is not collecting state GST, right? State GST is collected by the respective state government. So that is why it will not include state GST. So please know the important change which has taken place. But if you see last year, concentrate on last year, 22-23, right? So 22-23, if you see the income tax, you can just concentrate, and you can concentrate on GST. दोनों के बीच में कौन सा ज्यादा था last year? Last year, if you see, GST was higher than income tax last year. But now this has got changed. Income tax is more than the GST. That is why it becomes important. Mani is asking about what exactly is, why is IGST not incorporated here? You must know what happens is, IGST is collected on interstate supply of goods and services, and that IGST is distributed between center and state based upon the recommendation of GST Council, and that explicitly we are not incorporated here. That's the only thing. We are not explicitly, can you see, यहाँ पे IGST we are not explicitly shown it. So do not worry about the IGST collection कि कितना है. because when government itself has not shown how much is IGST collection, I don't think UPSC will ask you that aspect. And then you can see our expenditure. Everyone knows about it. Interest payment, subsidies, salaries and pension, grants to states, defense expenditure for maintenance, all of this. And if you see among all of these expenditure, the highest expenditure is for interest payment. Interest payment accounts for 10.5 lakh crore, which is very high, followed by subsidies, followed by grants to the state for creation of assets, and then there is defense. That's a decreasing order. And if you see the major subsidies, there are two major subsidies. You can see the total amount of money which we are spending on subsidies is 4.4 lakh crore. There are two major subsidies, food subsidy and the fertilizer subsidy. Between these two, the food subsidy is more than the fertilizer subsidy. The question is, where can you use this? You can use this in your mains while writing facts and figures related to subsidy burden on the government. Grants to the states for creation of assets are basically the grants which the center is given to states for various centrally sponsored schemes like MG Narega. So that grant is part of your revenue expenditure. Capital receipts, if you see, debt receipts plus non-debt receipts. And when I say non-debt receipts, it includes disinvestment, obviously. Apart from disinvestment, it also includes monetization receipts. I explained to you monetization, right? Like you have some assets created by the government. Like let's say you have road, ports, railways, which is created, railway infrastructure which is created by the government. This the government may transfer to the private sector. Government is just leasing out to the private sector. So private sector will in turn give money to the government. So this money which the government gets, we call it as monetization. It is not that we are selling off assets. It is not sale. It is what? Lease. Like we will lease it for next say 20 to 25 years. That is NMP, National Monetization Pipeline. So that is what is part of your capital receipts. And if you see from where are we getting majority amount of money, you can see borrowings, which is 17.5 lakh crore. And you know the borrowings, that is 17.5 lakh crore, that is itself is our fiscal deficit. And if you see disinvestment target, the government once again is unable to meet the disinvestment target. Government had set a disinvestment target of 51,000 crore, but government has achieved a disinvestment target of just 12,000 crore. Once again, where can you write this particular fact? You could write this particular fact in mains if you get a question about what are the challenges related to disinvestment. Then capital expenditure, if you see creation of new assets as well as loans to center and states, loans to states and UTs. And look at this point. You know, in the aftermath of the economic slowdown caused due to COVID-19 pandemic, the central government has been focusing a lot on creation of assets. That is why you can see the capital expenditure of the center has actually tripled in the last 4 years. Last 4 years, this capital expenditure has tripled. So much so that in this year, that is the upcoming financial year, the government has decided to spend 11,111 lakh crore. Look at the figure. The figure is very symbolic. 11,111 lakh crore. This is what the government is going to spend on the creation of assets. That is why it is important. So please do remember the important fact with respect to capital expenditure. I hope we are clear, right? And then we have a concept of effective capital expenditure. Effective capital expenditure means capital expenditure of the center, which is like 9.5 lakh crore, plus the grants which the center gives the states for creation of assets. This one. So that is like 9.5, and this is around 3. So you can see almost it is 12.5 lakh crore. This is how much money we are spending on the effective capital expenditure. Having understood this, let's look at the last aspect. Now look at this last aspect. This is very interesting. Defense expenditure. When you see defense expenditure can be both revenue expenditure as well as the capital expenditure. Both. Now, revenue expenditure in defense as of now is around 3 lakh crore. Revenue expenditure, which is basically for the purpose of maintenance. And capital expenditure for acquisition of new defense assets, that amount is around 1.5 lakh crore. So please understand, defense is not always revenue expenditure. Defense can be both revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure. But can you see in defense, where are we spending more money under revenue or capital? We are spending more amount of money on revenue expenditure, which is for maintenance, which is almost like double of the money that we are spending on capital expenditure in defense. Is this part clear? Right. Okay. Look at this question asked in prelims 2022. Can you answer this particular question asked in prelims 2022? Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer. Yes, what do you think is the answer? Acquiring new technology is a capital expenditure. Now you know what is capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is a one-time expenditure on creation of new assets. So obviously acquiring new technology is a capital expenditure. Look at the second thing. Debt financing is considered capital expenditure, while equity financing is considered as revenue expenditure. Now what is equity financing? Equity financing means you have a particular company. This particular company raises capital through issue of shares, and you know share means equity. So it has raised capital through issuance of shares. After getting the money capital, that money, if it is pending, then the statement here is saying that this capital which is spent is revenue expenditure. Obviously it is incorrect, because that money that we are spending after raising the share capital, we can use it for creation of new assets also, not necessarily that we'll use it only for revenue expenditure. So obviously the statement is incorrect. The right answer is 1 only. I hope everyone is clear with this. Look at this practice question. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer to this question. Which among the following correctly describes the ascending order of taxes collected by center in 23-24? Palak says A, Aditi says B. सबसे पहले, if you are answering, those of you who are giving me the answer as B, please read the question carefully. यहां पे मैंने क्या लिखा है? Yes, It is ascending order. What is ascending order? Ascending order means you'll have to start with the tax which is contributing the least and end with the tax which is contributing highest. Ascending is always lowest to highest. So if you see the answer here, the right answer in this particular case, the lowest is excise duty, followed by corporate tax, followed by GST, and then there is income tax. So right answer is this, answer C. Good. Those of you are given the answer as C, very good. Okay, and those of you who have given the answer as B, please start reading the questions carefully in the UPSC prelims. This is one of the most silliest mistakes which you can actually commit while attempting a question. So please read the question carefully, because you have understood everything, but while attempting the question, you have not read the question properly and you commit mistake, you end up getting negative marks on that. So please read the question carefully. Look at the next question. Let's see how many of you will get it right. With respect to receipts and expenditure of the government, how many statements given below are correct? How many statements are correct? Grants received by the government from international organizations is part of capital receipts. Irrespective of purpose of expenditure, defense expenditure in India is always accounted as revenue expenditure. Dividends received by the government from RBI is accounted as revenue receipts. Yes. Pratik says, okay, A. Sapna says only one, good. Abhishek says B. Santosh B. Lily B. Shubham A. Okay, Nancy A. Okay. Grants received by government from international organizations, please remember it is not part of capital receipts. It is always part of your revenue receipts. Please see this. यहाँ पे मैंने क्या लिखा यहाँ पे? Interest receipts, dividends of PSUs, user charges, and what is mentioned here? Grants in aid. So, the first is incorrect. Irrespective of purpose of expenditure, defense expenditure in India is always accounted as revenue expenditure. It can be capital also. Dividend received by the government from RBI is accounted as revenue receipts. Yes. So that way, the right answer is only one. Look at this. Practice MCQ number 10. Which among the following account for the highest share of expenditure for the government, for the center, in the year 23-24? For the center, the highest share is interest receipts. That is what we have covered. Okay. Now let's quickly have a look at the trends in the tax receipts of the government. So I told you the tax to GDP ratio in the year 23-24 is 11.6. But if you see the last 5 years, in last 5 years, there has been a fluctuating trend in tax to GDP ratio. So obviously, I would say the most easiest part as far as your prelims examination is concerned is when you see something is fluctuating. Why I would say it is easy? Because something is fluctuating, so there is no need to remember it, obviously. Just know that the tax to GDP ratio is fluctuating in the last 5 years. Then you can see, right now I told you share of direct taxes is 6.6, indirect taxes is 5. So share of direct taxes is higher than the indirect taxes. And if you see last 5 to 6 years, in fact not just 5 to 6 years, we can see last almost around 2014-15, 8 years to until now, generally the share of direct taxes is higher than the share of indirect taxes, generally. Why I am saying generally? If you could see the trends in last 5 years, you can see at least 2 years in which share of indirect taxes is more than the share of direct taxes, right? Can you observe which of those years share of indirect taxes is more than the direct taxes? You can see 2 years. 1, 2016-17, 5.6 indirect taxes, 5.5 direct taxes, and 2020-21, this 4.8, 5.5. So one important thing that you should know, mostly the share of direct taxes is more than the indirect tax, but in just 2 years, the share of indirect taxes is more. That is more than sufficient. Then you can see the trend in capital expenditure. I told you that as highlighted by the finance minister, the overall capital expenditure of the center has tripled in the last 4 to 5 years. And you can see from 4.1, it has increased to almost 11.1. That is the increase in the capital expenditure. In fact, not just capital expenditure, the effective capital expenditure has also seen a steady increase, which becomes quite important. So just one thing, there is increasing trend in both capital expenditure as well as effective capital expenditure. That is what you should know. I hope this part is clear. So let's quickly take up the questions for practice. Now, in what way questions can be asked? You can see this was a question asked in prelims 2017. The question asked in prelims 2017 did not ask you about facts and figures related to tax to GDP ratio or tax collection or fiscal deficit. It asked you a question about the important trends, which clearly tells you that for the prelims examination, there is no need to remember facts. You just have to remember the important trends. So keeping this in mind, let's take up a practice question. Look at this practice question. Practice MCQ number 11. Which among the following are direct taxes imposed by the center? Direct taxes. Let me see how many of you will be able to get the right answer. Direct taxes imposed by the center. Once again, read the question carefully. Okay. Here, you should look at which of these 1, 2, 3, 4 are direct taxes. But let me tell you that alone is not sufficient. Because I have not asked you which of the following are direct taxes. I have asked you which of the following are direct taxes imposed by who? Center. It means there are some taxes which are actually imposed by states and yet those are direct taxes. So, corporate tax, center. Capital gains tax, center. Is property tax a direct tax? Yes. Is professional tax a direct tax? Yes. But why is this 3 and 4 not correct here? The reason is these two taxes are the direct taxes imposed by the state and the first two are the direct taxes imposed by the center. So the right answer in this case is only 2. So that is how you should know. Good. Those of you are given the answer as only 2. Very good. Let's take up the next question. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer to the next question. Look at this. Which among the following best explains the concept of government expenditure multiplier? Abhishek, professional tax is basically a tax which is imposed on people who pursue professions such as engineers, doctors, lawyers, chartered accountants. So as the name suggests, professional tax. You are pursuing a particular profession, you'll be required to pay a tax called as professional tax, which is quite less. Parliament has fixed the upper limit on professional tax. Parliament has said the maximum limit on professional tax would be rupees 2,500 per year. So generally people pay professional tax of rupees 200 per month. It varies from state to state. So 200 per month. So in 1 year you have 12 months. So 12 into 200, how much tax do you pay as professional tax in our year? 2,400. Okay. If you see this question, government expenditure multiplier, the answer to this particular question is ratio of change in GDP in response to change in the government's expenditure. So that is what is government expenditure multiplier. So what is it? Let me just tell you. Let's say government increases the expenditure on creation of assets, because of which it will encourage private investment as well. So private sector will be interested to make more amount of investment on creation of roads and so on, because of which what actually happens is overall output, that is GDP, increases. And as the GDP increases, it is expected that the tax collection of the government will increase. And as the tax collection increases, can I say the ability of the government to spend more money on creation of assets will increase. So it's like saying virtuous cycle. And it is being said, if government spends 1 rupee on CE, capital expenditure, output, GDP, for every 1 rupee which the government spends on capital expenditure, output increases by 2.5. This is something which I have covered in last year's budget. So right answer is B. Ratio of change in GDP to change in government's expenditure. So you can see here, ratio of change in GDP, you apply this logic, change in GDP 2.5 divided by change in government expenditure is increased by 1. So government expenditure multiplier kitna hoga? 2.5. That is how it is. Okay. I hope everyone is clear. Good. Next is practice MCQ number 13. Consider the following statements related to receipts and expenditure of the government. Tax buoyancy is around 1.2, Ashok. It's more than 1. Consider the following statements related to receipts and expenditure of the government. Since the introduction of GST, the share of indirect taxes has been higher than the share of direct taxes in India. What do you think it is? This is incorrect. There has been increase in both capital expenditure and effective capital expenditure in last 5 years. Yes, answer is 2. Good. Okay. Now coming to the important deficits. I hope everyone knows the concept of deficit, right? You have revenue deficit, which is basically the deficit in the revenue account. And you can see the deficit in the revenue account. Revenue expenditure is 35.5. Revenue receipts is 27. So 35.5 minus 27, it is 8.5 lakh crore. That is the revenue deficit for India now. But that revenue deficit, we normally express it as percentage of nominal GDP. So when we express that absolute value as percentage, it is right now 2.8% of GDP. And we all know that revenue deficit basically represents the money which the government has borrowed for revenue expenditure, because we are spending more, right? 35.5 we are spending, but we are earning only 27. So from where did we spend more? Obviously we borrowed, and that borrowed money we spent it for 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. That is what is your revenue deficit. Next we have effective revenue deficit. Okay, when you see effective revenue deficit is revenue deficit minus the grants that the center gives to the states for creation of assets, which is basically like saying how much money the government has borrowed, and after borrowing how much money has the government spent for 1, 2, 3 and 4. What are we excluding? We are excluding the money which the government borrows and borrows to give grants to state for creation of assets. That is effective capital expenditure. That if we express in terms of percentage of nominal GDP, it is 1.8%. So effective revenue deficit is money borrowed by the government and spent for maintenance related revenue expenditure. Please look at the difference. Revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit. Both means borrowing. But in what way they are different? Revenue deficit means the money that we borrow and spend for the revenue expenditure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Effective revenue deficit means the money that we borrow and spend for 1, 2, 3, 4 here. I have not included the public administration, I forgot to include it, including the public administration. So what is it not including? It is not including this. And you should know the basics of public finance. That is, the government should never borrow money for maintenance related expenses. Government can borrow money for creation of assets, but not for maintenance. Because if the government borrows money for maintenance, obviously the government will not be able to recover that borrowed money. So government should borrow money for creation, not for maintenance. So that way, the difference between this and this, that is revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit is the money which the government borrows for maintenance related revenue expenditure. So obviously the maintenance related revenue expenditure should be what? 0. So ideally the government should not borrow money for maintenance related expenditure, and hence effective revenue deficit ERD should be equal to 0. Next, fiscal deficit. We all know fiscal deficit simply represents how much money has the government borrowed in one financial year, and that money which the government has borrowed in one financial year right now is 17.5 lakh crore, which right now is 5.8% of GDP. So fiscal deficit means money borrowed by the government and spent for both RE as well as CE, revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Money which the government has borrowed, money which the government has borrowed, money which the government has borrowed. Everything means borrowing. This government has borrowed money and spent it on RE. This government has borrowed money and spent it only for maintenance related RE, revenue expenditure. This is the government borrowed money of the government and spent it for both RE as well as CE. That's the basic difference. And we know that there should be a limit on fiscal deficit of the government because it will lead to increase in inflation and affect macroeconomic stability. Last part, primary deficit. Primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payment, which is like 6.8 lakh crore presently, and it is expressed in terms of percentage of nominal GDP. Where is this interest payment coming from? This interest payment is part of your RE, revenue expenditure. So how much our money we are spending on interest payment from RE, that is deducted from fiscal deficit to get primary deficit, which means What is primary deficit representing? It is the money which the government has borrowed and spent it for RE as well as CE, except for what? Except interest payment. Why are we saying interest payment? यहाँ पे देखो and यहाँ पे देखो. Money borrowed by the government and spent for both RE and CE. Money borrowed by the government and spent for both RE and CE except interest payment. Why is except interest payment coming here? Because primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payment. So in a way, primary deficit represents our net borrowings, excluding the interest payments. That is what is primary deficit. In a nutshell, this is the best way to know fiscal deficit, revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit. This is the best way. Fiscal deficit, money borrowed for both RE and CE. Revenue deficit, money borrowed only for revenue expenditure. Effective revenue deficit, money borrowed for what? Maintenance related revenue expenditure. I hope everyone is clear with respect to this concept. FD, RD and ERD. The bigger circle, FD, under bigger circle, RD, and under this RD, ERD. So it's like saying ERD is part of RD, RD is part of FD. So let's quickly take up the practice questions. We can just go through this deficits later. Let's take up the practice questions. Look at the practice question number 2000 asked in prelims 2016. What do you think is the answer? All of you. There has been persistent deficit budget year after year. Which action can be taken by the government to reduce the deficit? We have to, we should not introduce new welfare schemes, because if you introduce new welfare scheme, expenditure will increase, and this is not something that we should do to reduce our deficit. So we can just see, we have to reduce the revenue expenditure. We have to go for rationalization of subsidies. If you reduce import duty, the receipts of the government will decrease, and this is not something that we should do. So right answer 1 and 3. Let's look at the next question. Let's see how many of you will be able to get the right answer. Practice MCQ number 14. All of you. The tax expenditure of the government is likely to reduce during fiscal consolidation policy. So there are two things you need to know to answer this. You should know, number one, what is tax expenditure, and number two, you should know what is fiscal consolidation. Yes, what do you think is the answer? Yeah, Madhvi says A. Yeah, others. Ashok says 1 is incorrect. Charishma says C. Farid Charishma says that statement 2 is incorrect. Okay. Kanika says A. Shashank D. Niveda A. Okay. Let's try to understand here. What is tax expenditure, by the way? Tax expenditure simply means it is the revenue lost by the government due to tax exemptions. You know, government gives a lot of tax exemptions to the individuals, to the companies. Like for example, for the individual, the government may give tax exemptions in the form of, let's say, if the individual is making investment in mutual funds, or let's say the individual is making donation to religious and charitable organizations, then he can claim tax exemption. Companies can make investment in R&D and claim tax exemption. So whenever the government gives tax exemption, the revenue is lost by the government. How much revenue the government loses? That is tax expenditure. So you can see fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation means it's a policy which the government adopts during inflation. And during inflation, government should reduce the money supply. And to reduce money supply, can I say government should give less tax exemptions. So if the government is giving less tax exemptions, government will be able to suck out more money, right? So if the government is giving less tax exemptions, to tax expenditure of the government will reduce. So first statement is correct. So government reduces tax exemption during consolidation policy. Yes. So right answer, both statement 1 and statement 2 are correct, and statement 2 is the correct explanation for statement 1. That is what you have to know. So this is how you have to solve the answer questions. Can you see here? This is a new type of format of the questions which has been introduced in the prelims. That is what I have incorporated that. Let's look at the next question. The fiscal deficit represents the total money borrowed by the government and spent for revenue and capital expenditure, which is correct. A higher share of fiscal deficit is used for financing revenue expenditure. It is also correct. More amount of money that we borrow in India is used for RE rather than CE, which is correct. FRBM Act 2003 targets to eliminate fiscal deficit by end of March 2021. What do you think it is? Third statement. Third statement. Does it target to eliminate fiscal deficit? Think of it. It is not eliminating fiscal deficit. It is just trying to reduce fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP, not eliminating it, which means the third is incorrect. If third is incorrect, तो answer क्या होगा? Only 2, 1 and 2. Good. All of you who have given the answer as only 2, pretty good. Pretty good answer. Good. Okay, let's take up the next question. Okay, let's see how many of you will be able to answer this practice question. Take your time. It's a very interesting question. Consider the following scenario. A developing country is borrowing huge amount of money to finance its maintenance related expenditure, leading to unsustainable debt levels. However, such a country also needs to borrow money for creation of infrastructure projects. As a finance minister of such a country, which among the following steps would you take? Please have a read the question carefully. It's a little tricky. Shashank says C. Sapna says D. Satvik D. Niveda B. Samyak D. Ashok B. Okay, please let's try to find out the answer to this. सबसे पहले the keyword here is what? Developing country. Now tell me, should a developing country borrow money or not? In fact, it says here, however, such a country also needs to borrow money for the creation of infrastructure projects. So obviously, country should borrow money, right? It has to borrow money for what purpose? For creation of infrastructure projects. So yes, it should borrow. If it has to borrow money, obviously such a country need to have a certain level of fiscal deficit or not. It should have certain level of fiscal deficit. Some of you who have said कि we should eliminate fiscal deficit, it's actually bad. We should not eliminate fiscal deficit. We should borrow. So fiscal deficit तो होना चाहिए, which means option A is incorrect. But can I say that money that we borrow, it should be only be used for capital expenditure? That money should never be used for what purpose? Maintenance related purpose. And how do you ensure that the money that we borrow is not used for maintenance? Which deficit should you target? I just told you. There is RD, ERD, FD. RD shows money which the government has borrowed and spent it for RE. ERD shows the money which the government has borrowed and spent it for maintenance related revenue expenditure. So what we should target? We should target effective revenue deficit to be 0. So that way, if you as a finance minister want to be very efficient finance minister of such a country, what you should do? You should eliminate the effective revenue deficit. Yes. I hope now you got the point, everyone. Okay. Good. Now coming to last part. Last part is about from where does the government borrow money. You can see the government is borrowing money from this is source of deficit financing. Deficit financing, that is from where does the government borrow money. I told you fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit the government is 17.5 lakh crore. This is the government borrowing in 1 year. So from where has the government borrowed money? Market borrowings, securities against National Small Savings Fund or small savings, and external loans from foreign institutions. You can look at the graph here. In this graph, market borrowings are showed this side, and I told you total money borrowed by the government is around 17.5 lakh crore, which means almost around, you can see 12 lakh crore is through what? Market borrowings. Highest amount of money is borrowed through market borrowings, which is like dated securities, treasury bills, cash management bills, and so on. And second one is securities against small savings. I have discussed in the previous year's union budget already. Last union budget, in fact, I'll show you this. This is the same diagram which I had used in last year's union budget, where I had explained in the budget as to what exactly is securities against the National Small Savings Fund. Apart from explaining this aspect, in the last year's budget discussion, I had also discussed the introduction of a new small saving schemes of the government, which is Mahila Samman Saving Certificate. It was introduced in the last year's budget. That is why it is important. So please go to that point as well. Okay. So you can see Mahila Samman Saving Certificate has all of these parts. So eligible beneficiaries include women or guardian of minor girl. Guardian of minor girl can open a saving scheme in favor of a female, where the minimum deposit could be 1,000, maximum deposit could be 2 lakh, on which you get an interest of 7.5. Maturity is 2 years, and there is no tax to be paid on the interest earned from such deposits. All of this is part of the new small saving schemes of the government. So let's look at this question. MCQ number 17. All of you have a look at the question. What do you think is the answer? The money raised to small savings schemes get deposited into CFI. Does it get deposited into CFI or public account of India? It gets deposited into public account of India. The interest rate is completely market determined, not at all. The interest rate in small savings schemes is fixed by the government on a quarterly basis. So government is fixing the interest rates. So answer is neither one nor two. Look at the next question. Let's see. This one. With respect to Mahila Samman Savings Certificate. Mahila Samman Savings Certificate introduced in the Union Budget 23-24. Consider the following statements. It is a small savings schemes which is exclusively targeting women. Yes, indeed. It is exclusively targeting women, which is correct. There is no limit on the deposits. No, there is a limit, 1000 minimum, maximum 2 lakh. The rate of interest on the scheme is completely market determined. No, right answer, only one. Look at this question. Which among the following are included in the calculation of fiscal deficit in India? What is included in the fiscal deficit? Take your time. Market borrowings through dated securities, external borrowings, borrowings from NSSF, and government guarantees on loans taken by PSUs. Market borrowings through dated securities, yes. External borrowings, yes. Borrowings from NSSF, yes. Government guarantees as what is called as off budget financing. It is off budget financing. So right answer in this case is 1, 2 and 3. Yes, good. Apart from that, the last part is the status of the debt status of the central government, that is the total liabilities of the central government. So you can see last year the liabilities of the central government was somewhere around 152 lakh crore. From 152 lakh crore, the liabilities has increased to 168 lakh crore. And you can see the total liabilities is now 58% of GDP. It is only the debt of the center. We are not even accounting for the states. For states, it is more than 20%. And if you can see the total liabilities, it has broken down to two parts: public debt and liabilities under public account of India. Both are two different things. This and this together, 152 plus 16, 168. Both these two together says are accounted as total liabilities. And when you say liabilities under public account of India, it is the people's money with the government. When people are depositing money with the government, can I say it is not the government's money, right? It is the people's money. Since it is people's money, government is liable to give back the money to the people. That is why it is accounted as liabilities. Like people are depositing money in post offices. It is a liability for the government, so it is accounted as liabilities under public account of India. Public debt has two parts: internal debt, external debt. You can see between these two, the internal debt is much higher, 50% of GDP. External debt is just 2%. Internal debt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is how the government borrows money within India. And no wonder majority of the government borrowings are through dated securities. This account for the highest share. External debt, majorly it is from multilateral institutions. Multilateral institutions such as World Bank, Asian Development Bank and so on. That is from where we borrow most of the money from outside India. The extent of borrowings from other countries, as you can see, is very, very less. It's more from multilateral institutions. That is the status of the central government, debt status. And if you can see, this question was asked in 2019. This is a question specifically about external debt. most of India's external debt is owed by government entities? No, it is actually owned by non-government entities. All of India's external debt is denominated in dollars? No. Some of the external debt of India is also denominated in rupee. Which rupee? Basically, which aspect of external debt is denominated in rupee? It is the money which the government borrows through issuance of masala bonds. Masala bonds are issued outside India. We borrow in terms of rupees. So that masala bond. So right answer, neither one, not two. Look at the practice MCQ number 20. Practice MCQ number 20, if you see, which among the following are included in public debt of the center? Public debt. Only the internal debt and external debt are included in the public debt, not the liabilities under public account of India. With reference to public debt of India, consider following statement. Internal debt of the government. Internal debt of the government is higher than the external debt. Yes, indeed. I told you internal debt is around 50% and external debt is around 2%. Internal debt is dominated by securities against NSSF. No, internal debt is dominated by borrowings through dated securities. So right answer is only one. Let me see how many of you will be able to answer the last question here. Take your time. Which among the following are included in the non-financial debt of India? Non-financial debt. Those of you who have gone through my previous year's budget will be able to answer this. Non-financial debt of India. Niveda says A, Ashok says 2, 3 and 4, Anisha says B, Monish C, Gibson A. Okay, let's try to understand what is the non-financial debt of India. This is something which I have covered in last year's economics survey. We can just see, when you say debt, debt simply means the money that we borrow. Based upon who is borrowing money, that is which entity is borrowing money, we have the debt categorized into financial debt and the non-financial debt. Financial debt is the money which is borrowed by the financial sector. What constitutes financial sector? Basically banks. So whatever money the banks borrow, the question is, how do banks borrow money? Banks can very well borrow money by issuing corporate bonds, right? They can borrow money from other international institutions or let's say from outside India. So all of that money which the bank is borrowing, that we call it as financial debt, or any financial institution is borrowing money, except the borrowing by the financial institution, except that everything else is the non-financial debt. So now who is actually borrowing money and whose borrowing is included in the non-financial debt? It is government's borrowings, private borrowing, but here when I'm writing private sector borrowing, I have clearly mentioned what non-financial. Anyone except bank, any private entity except bank borrowing money, private non-financial debt, and the household. So non-financial debt, government borrowings, private non-financial debt and households. These three together is non-financial. And you can see non-financial debt of India 82, government का debt हो गया, center and state, this is for last year. Private non-financial debt 88, household debt 33. So that is what is non-financial debt. And if you see the right answer, this is not included. Borrowing by the banks is not included. Government borrowings is included. Household borrowings is included. Borrowings by the corporates through bonds is included. So right answer is only 3. I hope everyone is clear with this, right? So what I have done in this particular discussion of interim budget is I have discussed in detail the basics of the interim budget. Apart from discussing the basics of interim budget, I have also covered the important highlights of the public finance. This is what I have covered. 1, 2, 3. But let me tell you very clearly that this particular discussion is just a precursor to what is going to come next. This is just a brief overview where we covered basics and some important aspects of public finance. We have not gone into detailed aspects of interim budget that we normally do in a separately. So since the interim budget was released just yesterday, this is what I have covered in brief. And as told you, next time when we'll meet next week around 9th February, there you are going to have a detailed analysis of the interim budget, each thing about interim budget, and not just that. I told you this year's there is no economic survey, but there is a finance ministry's annual economic review that we are going to cover. And I'm also going to cover a collection of essays by the chief economic advisor, which is important from prelims also, mains also. I hope this part is clear, right? So I will meet you once again next week, same time, wherein I will be covering the last part of the interim budget, and this was basically a precursor only. I hope it is clear. Madhvi, as far as prelims 2024 is concerned, just refer to this class and the next class. In these two classes, I will cover each and everything. Do not worry about it. Okay. Samyak, when we say sovereign debt is the debt of the government, center as well as state. How much money the center and states have borrowed, that is sovereign debt. So in a way, you can equate sovereign debt as public debt indeed. I hope everyone is clear. You will get the PDF. Do not worry. The PDF will be uploaded on the YouTube channel. Not just a PDF. I told you, you'll also get a link for the practice MCQ. This is what I said. Practice test of previous budget and economic survey. This practice test of previous year budget and economic survey has totally 100 questions. So those of you who have not gone through the previous year's budget and economic survey, please go through that, and that after going through that, you can attempt these practice questions. I hope it's clear. Nancy, I'll let you know in the next class, right? You'll get to know how many classes will be there. As of now, for sure, next week we'll be meeting 9th Feb. Fine? Fine then. Thank you so much. Thanks for your interaction. Thanks for responding to all the questions which I had asked. The same thing will be continuing in the next discussion as well. Okay. Madhvi, you need to go through the previous year's economic survey, like I said. Okay, please go through the previous year economic survey. After going through the previous year economic survey, then you can attempt this particular practice test. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.